all of the progress that has been made, there is still no cure for metastatic HER2-positive breast cancer today. So we asked Dr. Kropp to discuss some of the latest efforts that researchers are making to further expand treatment options for patients with newly diagnosed metastatic HER2-positive breast cancer.
The standard has been for many years a combination of these two antibodies, trastuzumab and pertuzumab, along with a chemotherapy. Because of this new antibody-drug conjugate called trastuzumab deruxtecan was so effective in patients whose cancer had already developed resistance to initial treatment, there was a study called DESTINY-Breast09 in which patients with newly diagnosed disease were randomized to either that combination of two antibodies and chemotherapy, or just getting this trastuzumab deruxtecan antibody-drug conjugate in combination with the antibody pertuzumab. The patients who got the trastuzumab deruxtecan, also known as TDXD, antibody-drug conjugate, on average had their cancers controlled for almost 41 months, so well over 3 years, compared to about 2 years with the standard antibodies plus chemotherapy approach. And fortunately, both approaches worked well, and in fact, the response rate, meaning the percentage of patients whose cancer substantially shrunk, was very high in both arms. The other trial that was recently reported also was looking at patients with newly diagnosed disease, and they took a different approach to the trial I just mentioned. They were looking at patients who started on that standard treatment of two antibodies, trastuzumab, pertuzumab plus chemotherapy. Everybody got that, but then once patients got to the point where you're stopping the chemotherapy and just doing the antibodies, the so-called maintenance phase, they looked at specifically the patients whose cancers was not only HER2 positive, but also estrogen receptor positive, which is about 60% of HER2 positive cancers. And those patients, when they're in their maintenance phase, not only get the trastuzumab and pertuzumab, they also typically get an anti-estrogen drug like letrozole or fulvestrant. What they did in this trial was they took those patients who were getting the antibodies, trastuzumab, pertuzumab, and an anti-estrogen drug, and they randomized them such that half the patients also got another class of pill, oral drug, called a CDK4/6 inhibitor, in this case, a drug called palbociclib, also known as Ibrance. And they found that by adding the palbociclib to those patients who were getting endocrine therapy and the HER2 antibodies, that also resulted in very good and durable control of the cancer, such that the patients who were getting the palbociclib had on average their disease controlled for 44 months, really incredibly long periods of disease control, again, well over 3 years.